Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This video is part of the full course AWS DevOps Practitioner training. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete full course. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you. Welcome back team, and we'll continue our discussion. And again, Kubernetes is our primary focus to understand how the Kubernetes is working and how do you deploy your application in the Kubernetes and access the application with all the different best practices that we have been talked about, right? So do little practice on that and be familiar. Now, the Git concepts that I'm talking about here, having some knowledge about what is this Git and how do you use the basic commands is good enough, guys. You not to worry too much about the Git concepts, though it is really important, but from the usage perspective or from the scope perspective, how right, from the interview perspective, maybe, right, having some knowledge is good enough. Okay, so anyway, so the Git is the open source version control system which will be helping to the developer in order to write a code in an efficient way by following all the different best practices in a way that maybe let me put it this way. The Git is an open source software, uh, right, which is used as a source code control management, which will be helping the developer to fasten the development time. I mean to say, it will help the developer uh, to write a code in a fast manner by following the Git practices. Maybe that's the right terminology, right? What kind of the Git practices that I'm talking about? Like keeping the history of the changes of your source code in the Git local repositories, right? And ensuring that you can revert the changes back to the previous version whenever you wanted to, and looking at how many number of total commits that are done for your project, so on, so on, so on, so on, right? Now, since we know what is Git and how to use the Git at a base minimum, right? Maybe a couple of questions for you at this time, right? To go to the next step. So how are you going to ensure the code quality, guys? Let's say, can I say this statement? Each commit is equivalent to one kind of a version of your source code, correct? Right? Each commit is like one change in your project. That's how we need to think about it, right? So if then, let's say having the more number of commits is good or having a less number of commits is good. How do you measure the quality of the code in terms of maybe uh, quality of the developer in a way, right? So I have a developer who is writing the code, right? Having the less commits is good or having a more number of commits is good, right? So always it should be as much as possible a less commits. That's how we need to focus on, right? So that the number of commits will be less, the number of loggings will be less. It's very cleaner to look at the history, and even if you wanted to roll back, a lot of advantages that you get it through. So as much as possible, try to make the things right, a minimal number of commits only. That's one practice that you need to follow, right? Of course, it is not affecting anything if you are putting more number of commits, but unnecessary, right? It is increasing the log, and the people will think that, right? Maybe you are not a good developer. That's the reason you are keep on doing some changes and committing them, right? So the impression will go in a bad way, right? That's the reason. Try to make a minimal commits and make a quality code, right? That's how it is. Good. So the Git is a kind of a local version control system, and again, Git is not an automated version control system, correct? What does it mean, guys? So whenever a developer is doing the changes in the working copy, right, the Git is not going to track them and storing in the local repository directly. No, you need to, right, you as a developer need to run the git add command, right, add the changes into the staging, do a git commit, then add the changes it into the local repository. That's how we need to do this a step-by-step approach to ensure that your changes are saved it into the repositories. and we can use some commands to see the log and revert it back and all those things. I think I'm not too much worried at this time how to revert back the changes to the previous version and what are the different scenarios that we can do with the Git, all these things which are least important at this time, right? What is that I'm really looking at here, right? When the multiple developers are involved in terms of doing the development of a specific single project, how would all these different developers will be coordinating each other? That is something important, right? I mean to say, and I think the other day we have spoken that when the same project is being given for multiple developers, right, uh, the the speed of delivery will be increased. Why? All the people are working for the same project, and parallelly the people are working. The parallelism is implemented, so definitely the code will be ready in sooner than comparing to one guy is working the whole bunch of code, right? But the problem is whenever I ask multiple developers to work on the same project, right? At end of the day, the developer one made some number of lines, developer two will made some number of lines, the developer three will do some other lines of code. How are you going to make a product, guys? You need to take the code of all the three developers and put together it into a single project, correct? Then only you can achieve that goal, correct? Following me? So if then it's very difficult to take the code from all the three developers and merging the code coming from the three developers it into a single code base, correct? So usually, right, you know, the developer one don't know how the developer two and three working. The developer two don't know how one and three is working. The developer three don't know how one and two are working. Right? With that scenario, it's very difficult for them to coordinate and working on. Why I'm saying that one developer doesn't know how the other developer is working, because the developer one is working on his local system. That code is not visible for other developers. The developer 2 is working on his local system in his laptop, and that code is not visible for other two developers, right? Same way, if the developer 3 is working on his laptop, the other two developers doesn't know how he is working on. Getting me? So when the people are working for the same project, they must know each other how other people are working. Then only it is easy for them to coordinate and make a final, healthy code that we can start using as a single project or a single product. Correct? If not, let's say the developer one is taking one variable name, the developer two also will take the same variable name. When you are taking the code from both developers, when you are merging the code it into a single project, you get a conflict, right? Because both are using the same variable name, and maybe your code will complain that, hey, the variable name is duplicated when you are merging the both code it into a single file or a single project, right? So that means what? The Git by alone is not solving the problem of collaboration that you are expecting between the developers. What is that I'm expecting here, guys? Right? The code that is written by developer 1 should be visible by a developer 2 and developer 3. The code that is written by developer 2, that code should be visible by 1 and 3, right? The same way, whatever the code that the developer 3 is writing, that code should be viewable by 1 and 2. If then, when the developer 1 is writing the code, right, he can go and check how the 2 and 3 are working, what variables those people are using, right? What algorithm that they are using, what methods that they are using, how they are writing the code, everything will get to know by a developer one. If the developer one know how others are working, how others are making a variabilization or any other, maybe the developer one can write a code accordingly, which will be aligning according to the other developers as well, right? That's the goal here, which is called as a collaboration between multiple developers when all of them are working for the same project. So that collaboration can happen, right, with the introduction of a distributed source code control management system, right? So now let me introduce you the distributed SCM concept here. Let's say I have two developers. the developer 1 and developer 2 both are working for the same project. Okay, and when they are working for the same project, right, let's say the developer 1 is working on his own laptop in own system. Obviously the developer 1 system, the Git software is installed, right, and the developer 1 will create a working copy where he wanted to keep the code files, right. The developer 1 will create a local repository by running the git init command. Then the developer 1 will start putting some code files in his working copy, right, and he will be running the command called git add that will ensure that the changes are added to the staging. Then he will be running the git commit command. Then the changes that are there in the staging area will now be get committed to the local repository. That way, the changes that are done by a developer 1 on his working copy, everything will be now tracked and stored it into the local repository. Are we good with this, guys? This is how a developer 1 is working on his own system, right? Now, what is our requirement? How a developer is working, and that code should be viewable, should be accessible by a developer too, right? That's what is called as a collaboration here. To make a collaboration, right, we need to depend on a distributed repository system, and some of the example or some of the products that are supporting the distributed repository is Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab. Either you use Bitbucket or a GitHub or a GitLab, all these three products come from the three different organizations, or basically to solve the collaboration issues between the developers. Or I would say the Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab, all these three are actually working as a distributed repository management, right? So what is that we are doing here? Whichever that you choose, maybe Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab, right? You just need to create a contributors. In the sense, you go to your Bitbucket, right, and you add the developers as a contributors to that particular Bitbucket repository. Like who are who are the developers that wanted to do the collaboration? You just add all those developers as a members of this repository. Then the developer will become the contributor, will get the access to the Bitbucket, and will start doing the collaboration or coordination through the Bitbucket repository, right? As I said, the Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab, whatever you choose, the concept is same, right? So in your Bitbucket, you create a repository, which we call it as a distributed repository. Sometimes we call it as a remote repository as well. Sometimes we call it as a origin repository, right? All these terms will give the same meaning, guys. We can call it as a origin repository, or maybe a remote repository, or a distributed repository. Repository in the sense is kind of a folder structure where you are going to store some files, right? So whatever the files that are added by the developer one on the developer one system, right? Those files will now be get published to your remote repository. Publish in the sense like upload. The technical terminology is push. Okay, that means the developer one is trying to push, right? The developer one is trying to push the changes that the developer has made on his local system to a distributed repository, which is the remote repository in this case, right? So now what's happening here? I'm putting the into mark here, okay? That means if you look into this flow, right? I said that the developer one has worked on, right? And now the developer one is trying to push the changes to the remote repository, expecting that changes will now be taken care by a developer two. The thing is, the developer one, it's all like a collaboration concept that I'm talking about, right? The developer one cannot upload the files to the Bitbucket repository until unless he get the latest copy from the Bitbucket. Maybe I'll just talk about this in general outside of the technical concept. Let's say there are two people who would like to work in a no, in a collaborated fashion, right? The both people would like to share the things right in the single common location, right? So will you be putting the items on that common location without knowing what was there before? Getting me right? So I'm just giving the a general example here, right? When two people are trying to share a data which is in the a single common location, right? It's always a ideal case. You first go and verify what was there already in that common location. Once you get to know what is there, what is not there, then you put whatever you wanted to on that common location. Then the other people will come and see it. Getting me, guys? I mean to say, do not try to upload your content to the common location without you first going and checking what was there already, or is there anything that has been shared by other developers. Maybe let me convert it again to the technical term now. If the developer one is trying to push the code that he has written in the developer one system, local system, to the remote repositories, first he need to go and download the code or anything that is there in the remote repository. You verify it, right? Then you decide what needs to be done and put the latest changes back to the remote repository. Hope you are following me now. For example, right? If the developer one is not downloading the files from the remote repository, right, and he is trying to upload the files, what is the case? The developer two might have been already done on the same folder. You getting me, guys? Because the both developers are now accessing the same common folder. Both developers are accessing the same common location, which is now available in your Bitbucket. So the very first the ground rule here is, any developer whoever is trying to upload your files to that remote repository, first you go and download the content what was there before, then you see what changes that you need to add and put it back there. So in this scenario, if the developer one is trying to upload the file without you getting it first, it won't work. So what you need to do now, whenever the developer would like to work together as a collaborative way to develop a single project, and both developers are trying to use the distributed repositories for this coordination purpose. Once the repository is created in your favorite distributed repository which you pick up, could be a Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab, then you you download the content what was there in the Bitbucket to your local, right? So you see this, guys. First, the developer one is trying to pull the content what was there before, what was there already in the remote repositories. So what is there any files on the remote repository? All those files are the content, whatever is there will be get downloaded to the local repository. From the local repository, the content will be get fetched into a staging. From the staging, the content will be get fetched it into a working copy. This is the reverse operation that I'm doing now, right? Now, can I use this statement, guys? The content that is currently there in the Bitbucket repository, I'm just accessing the same content, or I have downloaded the same content to my developer one systems in the working copy, correct? Now you see what is the content, what content that got fetched from the Bitbucket repository. Then if you wanted to do any changes to that, you do the changes, modify, add file, delete file, do whatever you wanted to. Then you update the working copy. The changes you commit back to the local repository. Once you commit the changes to the local repository, then you start uploading that latest content by running the push commands. That way, the modified content by the developer one will be get published to the Bitbucket. If the developer two wanted to know, right, how the developer one has worked on, what changes that the developer one has done, right? If he wanted to know, same process will be followed by the developer two also. The developer two will first download the latest copy from the Bitbucket repository, which is kind of a pull or a clone operation, right? So the content that was uploaded by the developer one, which is available in the Bitbucket, will now be get downloaded by the developer two, and that copy will come to the working copy. Then the developer two will get to know what is the content. The developer two will do some changes to that copy if he wanted to, on top of the developer one changes. And again, he commit the changes to the local repository, right? And then the changes will be putting back to the Bitbucket repository by running the push command. What's happening here, guys? Can anyone follow you? Sorry, able to follow? So in simple words, right? In simple words, the developer one is downloading the copy from the existing, do the changes, put it back. The developer two will download the latest copy, do the changes, put it back. Again, the developer one will get the latest copy, right? Do the changes and put it back to the Bitbucket. That is how both the developers are sharing the a single common location, which is called as a distributed repository in this case. So that way the both developers are doing some kind of a collaboration here, because now I would say like the developer one is able to see how the developer two is working. The developer two is now able to see how the developer one is working, because the changes are coming into the same and common location. Both are able to download and view the changes of other developer as well, right? So just to repeat one statement again, whenever you as a developer are trying to push your changes to the remote repository, you first ensure that you have the latest copy with you. If you do not have, if you are not having the latest copy with you and you are trying to push, your push operation will get fail. The Bitbucket will be rejecting the changes, saying that, hey, you don't have a latest copy, and how come you can do the changes and put it back to me? No, you can't do that. First you pull the changes, you download the changes first, then you do your changes on top of that, then put it back. That is the right way of doing it. If you try to do the other way around, the Bitbucket is going to reject the changes and it will complain that no, you can't do this. You pull it first and do the add-ons and put it back. That's the process, right? So of course it's sometimes tricky if you are working with multiple developers and most of the people are working in the same common location. But yeah, that's the process that we need to follow here. No other way. Definitely the Git concept that I'm talking about will be a little confusing, guys. So I'm trying to spend some time on that process now, right? I'll just use the Visual Studio Code. Okay, now, yeah, let me show you some of the scenarios here. Can I do this? When we are trying to work with this distributed repository, right, probably it's a good idea to understand completely how the Git is working at a local system level. Then we'll deal about how to interact with the distributed repository. Are we good with this? Right? So that means now I'm first trying to show certain concepts in the Git local repository. Then I'll bring this distributed repository in place. Okay, let me go and do the things here. Maybe the other way around. So I'm just thinking the better strategy, guys. Okay, don't get confused. Maybe let me follow this approach. Okay, maybe I'll start with the distributed repository only. Okay, so what I'm doing, what I'm planning, right? Let's say I have two developers with me, and the two developers wanted to collaborate to each other and start doing the development practice, right? So what do you think? What will be the first step that I need to do here out of this whole story that I have talked about? Any guesses? Maybe I'll prepare the steps in the README file. So in the README file, I'm just preparing the plan, guys. I have a developer one and I have a developer two. Okay. Now the both developer would like to work together in order to develop a single project. Good. Now, where do I need to get started with? Okay. I'm thinking like probably the first step that I need to do here is creating a distributed repository that the both developer wanted to share their common or wanted to share their code, correct? I'm just starting from this distributed repository, guys. For example, think in general, let's say there are two people would like to share the content from the same common location. What is the first step that I need to do? First, you decide the common location, right? From which common location we both will share the content, correct? Then you decide what is that you are going to put into that or what is that you are going to get from there, correct? The same concept. So first I'm going to create a distributed repository, then we'll go to the next steps. So as I said, the Bitbucket, GitHub and GitLab are the possible choices that you can use to create a distributed repository. It's up to you which you wanted to use out of these three, right? The GitHub is completely a open source project. You can use the GitHub for your use cases, right? And the Bitbucket is the enterprise edition, but still it is available for you to use as a free trial kind of, I mean to say with certain limitations. Still, you can use the Bitbucket for your personal use and for the practice purposes. GitLab is again has its own enterprise edition concept, but with some limitations with your free account, right? So if you ask me what is the most used product in the real time, I would say the Bitbucket and the GitHub are most commonly used products in the most of the organizations. There are very quite few companies are still using the GitHub as well, right? So having the understanding about one single product is good enough, guys, because the other products are going to be working in the same fashion. Probably there is a slight changes in terms of the UI and other vendor specific things. Here, let me get started with the product called Bitbucket, and I'll show you how to create a repositories and all the other stuff. So these the Bitbucket, you don't need to download the software and install it and maintain it by yourself. The Bitbucket is available as a SaaS product. You all know, right? What does it mean by the SaaS product? SaaS product in the sense the Bitbucket product is available as part of your, the web browser itself. The bitbucket.org is the website name that you need to use here in order to get started with your Bitbucket account. So you just go to bitbucket.org and create an account. So in my case, I actually logged into my account already here. So if at all, let me sign out from there, right? So you can go to your Bitbucket and start creating an account by clicking on this create an account here, right? So if you have the account already created, you can just logging into your account with your specific email ID. Once you logging into your Bitbucket account, which is a SaaS product in this case, you just need to go and start creating a project first, right? So let me click on the project tab here and create a project for which project that you are trying to put your code over there. You can give anything that you like it for the project name based on for which project that you are currently working on. So here I'm just giving the project name as, let's say, Terraform VPC project, right? Maybe I wanted to keep my Terraform VPC related code into this project, right? Maybe I just put in AWS IaaC. Maybe I'll say AWS Infra. I wanted to keep all the AWS Infra related code into this project. And you can specify the project can be a private or a public here. If this is a public project, the code that you are going to keep in this project can be downloadable by a public people without passing any credentials. If this is a private project, this project will be accessible only to the specific people which you have given the access, not for everyone in the public forum. Obviously, in the real time, the projects will be private only, and that code will be accessible within your organization, right? If your manager has given you the access for that, or else no, right? And I'm just creating a private project for now, and let me click on create a project. Once the project is created, now inside the project, you need to create a repository. Repository is actually the space that we are creating, a folder that you are creating to start keeping your code into that, nothing else. You can create a repository by clicking on this create repository tab, or you can go to this create section here and just click on create a repository, right? Now you just need to fill up the details here, what kind of the repository that you wanted to create. Let's say I wanted to create a repository in the project called AWS_infra. Now specify the repository name. Let's say now I'll specify that I wanted to create a VPC, right? So this is the VPC repo where I wanted to keep all my VPC specific code. By default, this repository will become the private repository only because the project itself is a private, and definitely the repo that you are creating in that project will become the private repository only. In the sense, only the authorized people can access the content or code of this repository, not for the just public people. Now, at the time of you are creating a repository, it is asking you that you wanted to include a README or not. If you say yes, by default, one file will be get created in this repository. If you say no, the repository will be created with a empty file. It's a best practice to create a README file. The README file will be get created, which will be a common file for most of the repositories where you wanted to do the code development, because the README file will have some instructions about the code, right? What the code is all about, for which project that you are writing the code, any specific instructions that you wanted to mention. It's kind of a code documentation, right? That you can maintain in the README file. So it's better to create a repository with a simple dummy sample README file. That's it. Now you just go and click on create a repository. So don't worry about the other details like the branch name and the .ignore file. All these we'll talk about this later. Just click on create a repository now. Right now I can see that the repository has got created successfully inside a project. Now you see that by default there are two files that are created for you in this particular repository. So one is the readme file, the other one is the .gitignore file. So this is where you can get to see the files that are there in this repository and the size of the file and the message of the commit and the last commit time when this is last committed. More or less, the Bitbucket repository that I have just created is a Git repository only. That means whatever the features that I'm talking about, the Git repository, Git local repository in your local development system, all those features, concepts will be still applicable for your distributed repository also. Because when you are creating a repository here, right, it is a Git repository only. It is a Git repository only, no difference. I meant to say the local repository that I talked about previously as a .git, right? The same kind of a .git repository will be get created on the Bitbucket as well. No difference. The difference is the .git folder or the .git local repository that you create in your system will be accessible within your system only, not for everyone. But the .git repository that you are creating inside a Bitbucket or inside a distributed repository concept, that will be accessible by multiple people because that's accessible over the internet space for a collaboration purpose, no other things, right? Now, if I come back here again, okay, so I have created a project, and inside the project, I created a repository. Now, in this repository, I can start putting my files. You can create a multiple repositories part of a single project, or can create a multiple repositories part of multiple projects too. Right? Let's say now this repository I wanted to use to keep my VPC code. If you wanted to keep your Kubernetes manifest files, you can go and click on create a repository and you put one more repository and start putting the another project data it into that repository. Mostly each project data, when I say project from our technical perspective, right? Not from the Kubernetes, sorry, not from the not from the Bitbucket, okay? So let's say deploying the EC2 server is one other Terraform project. Let's say deploying the the you know uh, auto scaling group, maybe a load balancer, all those stuff is maybe another project. I meant to say each Terraform project, if you wanted to keep it into a different repositories, yes, you can do that too. You can create another repository and put all these things guys. In shortcut, yes, you can create multiple repositories that you like it and just plan how you wanted to use those repositories, right? So in the Bitbucket, right, uh, if you click on this source, that is where you get to see the actual files that are there in this repository. If you click on the commits tab, this is where you get to see the commits that are happening to this repository. The moment when you create a repository, there will be a initial commit, right? And with some commit ID. This initial commit will ensure that some default files are getting added to the repository, like a readme file or the .gitignore files. Right? This is the graphical user interface in order to access the repository. You can click on the file name if you wanted to see the content of the file like this. It has some dummy content, right? Of course, it will help you to edit the content as well here only by clicking on this edit option. And you can just modify the content on the Bitbucket itself, possible. But it's not a good idea to modify the content in the Bitbucket itself, guys. Okay, I'm clicking on cancel here. I'll go back to my repo, right? So if you want, you can create a new file as well. You see here, I can go to this symbol and can click on add file and create a one more file as well. So you can do all this, but that's not a best practice to modify the content or create a file from the Bitbucket UI itself, right? Rather, it's always better to do the modifications in your local development system. Well, so I think being said that in my plan, right, the first step is to create a repository that is done. What will be my second step, guys, now? Right? So let's say now I have a Bitbucket repository. Now I'll ask my developers, hey developers, right? Hey developers, right? This is the Bitbucket repo that I created for you guys to do a collaboration to develop the project. You both developers can start using this Bitbucket repository, right? So one developer is mine, right? Let's say I already logged into my Bitbucket account here, correct? My Bitbucket account name is DevOps real time, correct? So I already logged in here. So this is the developer one, right? Now, what about the developer two, correct? Right? So I got the access to this Bitbucket repository because I already logged into this Bitbucket account, and this is the developer one account. Let's say the dptrealtime@gmail.com. This is the email ID of a developer one. That's where I currently logged in here, and I'm able to access this repository. Now, when I'm expecting this Bitbucket repository has to be accessible, contributed by multiple developers, the access should be there for this repo for both developers, correct? Right? So the developer one has access, correct? So if I talk about the developer one has access already. Why? The developer one, let's say dptrealtime@gmail.com. That is the email ID of a developer one. And that's where I actually created a repository also, correct? So if then can I say that the dptrealtime@gmail.com, this is the Bitbucket account, right? So this particular email, right, or this particular developer one, can I say owner of the repository, right? The developer one is now become the owner of this particular repository that was created some time back, because he is the one who created repository, and definitely this guy will become the owner of this repository, and this guy can have a complete access to this repository to do anything else. That's the reason even if I come to this repository, right, and in the left side panel you see that the repository settings option, I'm able to see the repository settings. Why? I'm the owner of this repository and I can do anything that I wanted to. I can even change the settings as well. Now, how would the second developer will get the access, guys? Let's say now I'll ask my second developer, hey, there is a Bitbucket repository. You please access this repository for contributing the code. Who would be giving the access to this, guys? Right? So the developer one, who is the owner of the repository, now should grant the permission to the developer two, saying that, hey, Now onwards you access this repo and you can contribute the code, right? So what I say is, the first thing is the developer one should add developer 2 as a contributor, right? This guy should add the developer 2 as a contributor. For that, the developer 2 should have an account in the Bitbucket, guys, right? The developer 2 should have an account in the Bitbucket repository, right? So what I do is, probably I will use a different browser just to have a second developer account. I'm trying to make the things clear, and I see a question that at first in the chat window, okay? At first, is the account creator has to give the access to dev1 to create the repository? Who is account creator, right? The developer one itself is the account. It's my account, right? The developer one has created a account in the Bitbucket repository, and I am the developer one that I'm treating, right? Getting me? There's nothing like a account creator here, and I have got an account in the Bitbucket repository, sorry, in the bitbucket.org, and I am treating myself as a developer one, and I created a repository here, and I'm the owner of the repository. Now I know I can decide who else can have an access to my repository. Getting me, guys? In the another browser here, I have the second browser here. In the second browser, I have got logged into the Bitbucket in the using the different email ID. You see this? Let's say another user, another developer like a PR, right, has created a account in the bitbucket.org with a different email ID. This is the second developer email, and he also got an access to this. Sorry, uh, able to access the Bitbucket account, right? Now this developer asks the access. Hey, I also have an access to the bitbucket.org website. Can you give me the access to this repository to contribute my code as well? Yes, every developer should have their own Bitbucket account with their email ID. Obvious, right? Obviously. So the first developer has an account in the Bitbucket repository with the email ID called dptrealtime@gmail.com, and he has created a repository already. That's the reason the first developer has become the owner of the repository. The second developer has created an account in the bitbucket.org with the email ID called PRSR, which is my personal email ID, guys, right? And he has got an account here, right? So that's where I was showing the screen, right? So in the Bitbucket, the both developers will now become the contributors, so that these two developers will have their own individual Bitbucket account, and these two developers should have an access to the same repository. So first, the developer one has created a repository and he become the owner. Now this guy has to give the access to this repository to the other developer whoever would like to have an access to the same repository. You see in the second developer account, if he go to this repository tab, he get to see some repositories here, but he can't see the repository, right, of you can't see the repository that the developer one is currently created and currently working on, because the access is not granted yet, correct? So when the developer 2 is asking the developer 1, hey, please give me the access to the repository, right? So the developer 1, this is my developer 1 account. The developer 1 has to go to the repository. Now the developer 1 has to go to the repository settings. In the repository settings, right, there is a option called repository, maybe permissions. Now add user, specify the email ID of a second developer, right? Specify the email ID of the second developer who has already registered in the bitbucket.org. And here you can specify the level of permissions, like what kind of the permissions that the second developer can have on this repository. The read access, in the sense, the second developer can only see the code and can read the code, but he can't upload anything back. Write permission, in the sense, the second developer can read it and can also, push the code back. Admin, in the sense, the second developer also can manage the settings. In general, it's not a good idea to give the admin permission for everyone, right? Maybe I'll just give the write access here. Confirm. Now you see that this second developer is added as a contributor to this repository. Let me go back to the repo now. Now, if I go to the second repository here, or the second developer's account, and do a simple refresh, now you get to see this. The moment when I refresh my Bitbucket account, the second developer's Bitbucket account, I see that the VPC underscore repo is populated. If I go inside the repository now, you see the settings option is not coming here. Observe it, right? The second developer's Bitbucket account, he is not able to see the settings option for this repository. But if I go to the first developer account, in the first developer account for this same repository, he is able to see the settings option because he's a owner and he has a complete administration permissions on this repository. Even this developer can go and delete this repository if he wanted to, because he has the settings and he is admin, he is the owner of the repo. So pretty much the both developers are now accessing the same repository, guys, and the first developer is able to see the content whatever is there in the repo. The second developer is also able to see the same content whatever is there in the same repository only, because both developers are now added as a contributors to the same repo. Good. So if I go to my planning here, so this step is completed, right? So probably I'll say like access granted to developer 2. I'm just putting the step here only because I created a Bitbucket repository, right, from my developer 1 account only, right? Probably it's best to put the steps like this. Now, what is the next step, guys? Now, whichever the developer wanted to do some contribution to this repository, they will start using this. Okay. Now, let's say I wanted to start doing the development as a developer 1 first, right? So if I go to this architecture, I think I'm completely done with my Bitbucket level configuration. Now the time for me to work with a developer 1 local system. Let's say this Visual Studio Code where I'm currently working on this, you consider that it is a developer 1 system, and let me start doing the development, right? What is that I have said sometime back, guys? When you start doing some changes or when you start doing the code development, right, the very first thing that you need to download the code from the existing Bitbucket repository to the local, then you start doing your own changes, correct? Let me follow the steps now. I'm just putting step number 1 again. Okay. Maybe this is like configure Bitbucket, right? This is like configure local repo or development system, correct? On the developer one system. In the developer one local system, which is the development system in this case, what I'm trying to do here is first I'm going to, there are two different ways to go about this, guys. Probably I'll try to talk in both. Okay. The first thing is I'm just trying to create a directory. Let's say I wanted to create a directory called code. Any directory name is fine. I just created one folder. This folder, I'm calling it as a working copy. I just created a working copy. Create a working copy. What is the next step, guys? I did yesterday, right? How to set up in local system. So the next thing is create a local repository, correct? Currently, I'm working as a developer one. I'm trying to start doing the development. The first step is I created some working copy folder. I went inside the working copy. Currently, I'm inside the working copy. Now let me run git init command. This command is going to create a local repository in this working copy. I will confirm that the local repository got created successfully. Good, right? Now, what is your next step? What is your next step? So can I go and start putting some files in my working copy? No, right? Because the process says that once you created a working copy, once you created a local repository, you should not start putting the data. Why? The first you need to get the latest from the remote Bitbucket repository to the local, and then you do the changes on top of that. That is the process, right? Or else it will not work. So now you as a developer one, first you try to get the latest copy from the Bitbucket to the local. For that, you need to configure which is the remote repository, how to download it from there, all these details, right? So that means the next step is configure the remote repository. When I say configure, that means you need to add the remote repository details. From which remote repository I need to pull or I need to push all these things. Let me show you the command now. My screen got struck. I'll get the shell again. Okay, so what I do is git remote add and specify the remote repository name. I'll give the name as origin. The name can be anything that you like it, not a worry, but origin is the best practice that most of the people will be following, and I'm using the same name, but it can be any name that you like it. Git remote add and the remote repository name, and then you specify the remote repository URL, right? So to get the URL, that means how do you access this repository? You need to have some URL, right? So probably this is the URL name. You see this? Just copy this URL and give it here. If you don't know how to pick the URL, always you can click on this clone button and specify HTTPS here as authentication. Then you get the URL here. You see this? This is how you need to get the actual URL, how you need to copy. Copy this URL from here and put it here. Now you hit enter. This command, I'm just adding that, hey, this is the repository URL, how you need to pull, from where you need to pull and to where you need to push. I'm just configuring them it into the local. Git remote -v is the command to verify the details again. You see, I added a remote repository as a origin, and this is the website URL. I would say like the repository URL, from which URL it has to fetch the code, to which URL it has to push the code. The details are added. Good. So what I did, I just configured the remote repository. Then I just verified the remote repository details. Verify the remote repo configuration. Right. The next step is, now my local repository know that my developer one system local repository know that from which Bitbucket it has to fetch, to which Bitbucket it has to push. The configuration is added, right? The next step is I'm going to do a git pull command. Hey, pull the latest code that is available in the Bitbucket repository to my local system, right? Git pull origin master. So git pull in the sense I'm going to pull the code, the latest copy from the Bitbucket. From which Bitbucket? Origin is my Bitbucket repository your name, which is just you have added some time back, and pull it from the master. What is master? Master is the branch name, which is the default branch name that will be get created in your repositories. Let me verify that. In general, if you come to your Bitbucket repository and you see the branch names here, so you can see the branch name as main. Okay, I think this is the recent change, guys. Previously the default branch name is master. Now I could see that the branch name is main. For now, don't worry about what is this branch name, why the branch names are there, all these things. We'll talk about the branching strategy later. But for now, by default, there will be a branch, which is like a virtual or logical folder. And in that branch, all of your code will be located. So if you wanted to download the code, you need to tell that the code has to be get downloaded from which branch. That's how it will be, guys. In this case, I wanted to download this code from the branch name called main, right? So you just need to specify that here as a branch name. Probably it may give you the error because the master is not available. Let me see. So this command meaning is, hey, I wanted to download the code from the origin repository. The URL is already there here, and I wanted to download it from the master branch. You see, it's telling that, hey, the master is not found. Why? In the Bitbucket, right, the master is not available here in the branch list, right? It is a main. So that's a default name that it has given. So you just need to tell that, hey, download from the branch name called main. Now you see it is actually downloaded it from the Bitbucket to the local system. Now you can see that the README file is actually downloaded from Bitbucket to the local, guys. Now if you do a git log, the git log saying that your project is modified one time. Where it is modified, guys? It actually downloaded the copy from the Bitbucket, right? So all the Bitbucket commits, all the Bitbucket code files, everything is now available in your local system. everything is got pulled in. So now can I say that the developer one has the latest copy of the Bitbucket in his local? Yes, right? So once you have the latest copy of the remote repository to the local, then you start doing your own changes, right? Now you go to the folder and start creating the new files. Let's say I wanted to create a vpc.df file. Whatever the changes that you wanted to write, you can do this. I'm just putting some dummy code.
Hey, Pierre, what is the difference between this cloning and remote add?
We'll see the clone in a while.
Okay.
Let me go on mute for 30 seconds, guys. You can continue putting your questions there. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So I'm just looking at now. Yes, I got like whatever is there in the origin repository, right? Everything is now got pulled into the local, including the files, including the commit history, right? There is one commit, right? The commit message, all the things. I can see the commit ID and starting with the DE something, right? I think I can see the same commit ID here, starting with the DE something like this. Looks good. Now, since you have the latest copy of the remote repository in your local, now you start doing your own changes, right? So let's say I created a file, right? And you start putting some code over there. Whenever you're done with your own changes, then start committing, right? Let's say I wanted to add the changes to the staging, right? Then I wanted to commit the changes to my local repository, right? Right? Let's say VPC block is added. Of course, it is telling that please tell me who are you, correct? So I need to tell that git config user dot name, right? So the name of your the name of the developer who is currently working on, right? So this is the developer one, right? So I'll just give the developer one name here. Let's say dpt real time git config user dot email dpt realtime at gmail.com. Now let me run the commit one more time. Done. Now if I do git log, the git log says that the project is modified 2 times. The first change is actually pulled from the origin repository. The second change is actually done in my local itself. Now my git local repository is up to date. The changes that you made in your working copy are now available in the local repository. Now the time for you to push the changes to the Bitbucket. We need to use the command called git push origin and the branch name. The changes that you have done here, these changes should go to which branch, right, in your repository, in this repository. So as I said, all the content must be resided inside a branch only, guys, right? That's mandate. By default, your code is in the main branch, right? Uh, when you pull the code, you are already specified, right? Sometime back, correct? If you go back, you see here at the time of you are pulling the code, you said that the code has to be pulled from which branch, right? Now in the same way, right? Now we need to tell the code has to be get pushed to which branch. Now tell me guys which branch that I need to use now, right? So let me try main. We'll see if it works, right? So it is giving me a error now, right? This looks different now. Okay, that's okay. So it's giving me a error now saying that hey, you can't push the code to the main branch. Okay, why? So the way how the branching strategy, the way how the branching concept is there in the Bitbucket repository where your entire code is in the specific branch. In the same way, there will be a branches in your local repository as well. Git branch, right? Git branch is the command that you need to run in your local system to see currently the code is in the which branch. Getting me, guys? Because even in the local system, you are currently inside a Git repository, right? That means the vpc.tf file that you have created just now, this file is definitely be there inside a branch only, because in the Git, your code definitely, your files should be definitely within a branch. Without a branch, no, you can't work on, right? So here in the local, the default branch name is master. Hence the reason you see that I'm currently inside a master branch. But in the Bitbucket, the default branch name is main, and that's where you are actually pulled from, correct? So that means what? In the Git local, I'm working on the master branch. In the Git remote, I'm currently working in the main branch. The branches are not in sync actually. So when you try to push, it will and it has to ensure that from the same branch name in the local, it has to push to the same branch name in the Bitbucket as well. Then only the push operation will be successful. Here what I'm doing, I'm actually trying to push from the master branch of your local repository to the main branch of the Bitbucket repository, and which is not going to be working. Make sense, guys? The reason why it is not working, whenever you are trying to push, whenever you are trying to upload the content or the changes to the remote repository, ensure that the local branch and the remote branch are the same, or else it will not work, and it is complaining it now. This confusion was not there before because earlier, right, in the local, the default branch name is master. Even in the Bitbucket, the default branch name is master only. So there was no confusion. But now, the right, in the local, by default, it is giving you a master branch. In the remote, it is giving you the main branch, and there is a confusion, right? Now, what I do here? So can I do like this? Git push origin master. Why? In my local system, in my local system, currently the code is available in the master branch, right? That's the reason I'm trying to push my code to the master branch only in my origin as well. Now the branching is matching, right? In my local, the branch name is master. In my remote, my branch name will be a master. So I'm trying to push the code from my local master to the remote master. And let me hit enter now. I don't know, lot of changes, lot of mess today. That's okay. It is telling that, hey, you can't push the changes to the master because you are not authenticated. It's just asking for the credentials. Okay. So obviously, right, because the repository that I created is the private repository, right? You must be supplying the credentials to authenticate before you are pushing the code, right? So we need to supply the Bitbucket, username and password. Then only the push operation will fail. So somehow it is getting the local credentials somewhere and the credentials are not matching. How to clean up the credentials that are there in the local, guys? Okay. sorry, what's happening, right? It is not asking me the credentials, right? Somehow, like when you run AWS configure command, right, how the credentials will be stored somewhere in the local. Same way, the Bitbucket credentials are saved somewhere in my local system. It was old credentials. It is still using that old credentials, which is already there somewhere in my local, and it is complaining that the credentials are not matching. Hope you get me right, why it is failing. So I need to clean up the previous old credentials. Then it will ask for the fresh credentials that I need to give it there. Let me try. This is my local system issue, guys. Nothing new actually. Let me do it from EC2 because it takes time for me to do some cleanup on my local system. I keep on changing my credentials for different use cases, so somehow it got messed up. I'll just do the same thing on my EC2. Okay, nothing different. Nothing different. My local system has some issues. So let me do the same thing from EC2. Just think that the EC2 is my development system, correct? Let's say this is the developer one system. Let's say this is the developer one system. Maybe I'll create a two servers, okay? One is for developer one and one is for developer two. It's best idea to work with two EC2s. One is the developer one is the developer two system. Just to showcase that there are two developers working on their individual systems, right? Maybe one is dev one and one is let's say dev two. I have two systems. So let me logging into the dev one. This is the developer one system. Right, so by default, the Git software will not be there on the EC2 instances, obviously, right? Now we need to install the Git. Yum install Git is the command to install the Git software. I'm just using this EC2 server as a developer one system, guys. As usual, let me follow the steps again. mkdir, I'll create a working copy. Let's say code underscore. I'm just replicating the same thing, guys. Code underscore dev, right? So I just created something like that. I'll go inside the folder. Now I will run git init command to create a local repository. Since when the branching names are got changed, right? Now I'm even getting some warning saying that currently the default branch is master, but that is going to be changed very sooner. Okay, that's okay for now. Now the other command is git remote add origin. Let me add my remote repository URL. I'm just repeating the steps again in my EC2 since my local system has some issues. Now let me verify it again. Git remote -v. Good. Now let me do git pull origin master. You see, this is how I'm expecting in my local as well. It has to ask me to provide the credentials for authenticating the Bitbucket. So now it is asking for the password of the Bitbucket account to pull the latest copy from the Bitbucket. So how do you get the password, guys? Right? I think the other day I have given you one hint that nowadays you are not going to use the username and password that you usually supply at the time of logging into the UI, right? Always it's better to create a token and use the token when you are using the command line authentication, right? So in my developer one system, let me try to create a token. So probably in the settings, probably in the personal Bitbucket settings, and you can go to app passwords and create a app password here. Give the name. Let's say this is a dev1 key. Any name is fine. You can give the permissions as well. What kind of the permissions that you wanted to give to this particular key, so that wherever you are using this key, that key will have access to this repository only whatever you have been mentioned here. That's how it is. For now, let me give the right access for all the projects and all the repositories. Right? Maybe I'll just click on create. So this is the token that I have got it. Copy the token and give the token here as a password. Now you see, it should be main. It was working somehow on my local system because my local system got corrupted already, right? That's where previously in my local system, when I executed git pull, somehow it worked for me. You see, git pull origin master. Oh, not even. I tried git pull origin main, right? Yeah, that's true. Let me do git pull origin main. Oh, I tried git pull origin master sometime back. I think I'm keep going for master branch, guys, because it's years that the Bitbucket is giving you the master as a default branch. Okay, this is the recent change. They have made it to a main branch. That's okay. Let me give the password again. Why it is invalid password? Yeah. So now I can see that the latest copy got pulled in. The latest copy has just a readme file, right? I just got that simple file. Now let me do some changes. Vi, let's say vpc.tf file, right? And you do some changes to the code. I'm just putting some simple code. Right? Now save the file. Now you do git add to add the changes to the staging. Of course, git config user.name. This is tpt real time, which is the developer one account. Git config user.email gpt realtime at gmail.com. Now git add, git commit, vpc block is added. Now git status. Now git branch. So in my local, it is currently in the master branch. Git push origin to the master. The only reason, since in the local by default it is coming up with the master branch, and I have to push to the master only. That's the best practice. Again, it is asking for the password, and this is the password. Let me copy it again. Right. So I'm just pushing to the master branch, guys, from my local. You see that from your local, from the master branch, I'm pushing to the master branch in the remote as well. If you come to your developer one Bitbucket account and just go to your repositories, go to the VPC repository. Now in the branching tab here, you can see that the master branch, what's happened, right? Whenever you push the changes to the master branch, because the master branch is not already there in the Bitbucket, it is creating a master branch and keeping that code in that master branch. That's what is happening, right? That means at the time of you are running the push command, you don't need to ensure that the branch is already exist. No, not required. The branch will be get created automatically in the remote, and the code will come to that branch only. You see now, uh, if you go to the main branch, you will see only the readme file. Sorry, right? But if you go to the master branch, now you will see the vpc.tf file as well. That's how the changes that you have committed are available only in the master branch, not on the main branch in this case. The main branch has the initial code, master branch has the latest code that you have published. That's how the branching strategy works here. Each branch will have its own copy here. But that's not my requirement, right? My requirement is my code should be there in the main branch, not on the master branch, right? So whenever you are pushing the code to the different branches, now we need to ask the Bitbucket that, hey, the changes that are came to the master, I wanted to commit, or I wanted to merge it into the main branch. For that, you need to create a pull request here, right? So in the pull request, you just go to the create a pull request. Now this is where you need to create a request. You see the source branch. From the master branch as a source, I wanted to merge the changes into a destination called main branch, and just specify the create a pull request, right? So it will just tell you that when you are merging the changes from master to the main, what are the differences? It is just showing the differences that this is the extra file that is there in the master, which is not there in the main branch, and this is the extra content that were added, right? If you are happy with this, just click on merge and click on merge. You can close the source branch as well. It is actually merging the process. Now if you come back to the source tab here, now you'll see only one branch because the master branch is deleted, because I no longer require the master branch here, right? Because the changes that were pushed to the master are actually merged into the main now. You see, in the main branch itself, you are able to see the vpc.tf file, which you are expecting to be available. That's it. So that means what? Of course, the developer who is working on the local system is added a change. That change is actually pushed to the master branch, and from the master, I'm merging it into the main branch. That's how it works. Now currently in the main branch, my changes are there. The problem is, I think when I delivered the Bitbucket last time, I didn't see the main branch. It was master only, but I got to know, I know that soon they are changing the terminology from master to main, but yeah, today is the time that I can pick it up and I see that. Because ideally, I don't want to use the terminology called main and master. Okay, so either I have to use main or I have to use master. There is no sense in using or merging from master to main, guys. Okay, so but yeah, since I see the change just today, somehow I have to use the same concept, because in my local it is a master, in my remote I have a main, and always confusion is there, right? But yeah, I just have to drive in the same way, which added some more confusion here. But I think I don't want this kind of a confusions anymore. So what I do now is right, I'll repeat the steps tomorrow as well one more time, just to avoid the confusions directly with the main branch only, not using any more a master. So technically I should not use the master concept at all, right? In my delivery, I have to use only the main. But yeah, for some reason my local is still there in master. That's a problem. Anyway, so just to conclude the topic for now, right? Let's say the developer one somehow struggled here and published some changes to the Bitbucket, right? Now I'll ask my developer to, correct? So if I go to the steps here in the README file somewhere, right? So the developer one has verified the configuration, and now the developer one will run git pull. Now the developer one will add files. Now the developer one will run a git push, correct? Somehow the changes are there in the Bitbucket. Now let's say I'll ask my developer to, hey developer 2, can you do some changes to this same code? What will be the developer 2 series of steps, guys? I'll go to developer 2 now. The developer 2 wanted to work on the same repository to do some changes. I'll just do this for today. Tomorrow I'll try to repeat most of the concept again by avoiding this master to main terminology change confusions. This is the developer 2 system, guys. The developer 2 wanted to work on the same code what was done by the developer 1, right? So in the developer 2 system, I will use the yum install command to install the Git software, right? Now, what is the next step, guys? So in the developer system, right, sometime back, you see, in the developer 1 system, sometime back, I created a I created a working copy. I done a local repository. Working copy I created using mkdir. Local repository I created using git init. Remote repository I added using git remote add. Verified it by using git remote -v. I pulled the code using git pull. So pretty much step 1 to step 5, right? I did it. All these 5 steps can be done using a single step called git clone. All what you need to do now is go to the developer 1 system, the developer 1 account, go to the repository that you wanted to use, go to clone, select HTTPS as an authentication mechanism, copy this command, git clone and specify the URL, just copy this. Go to the developer 2 system and just run this command. It is asking for the token of the developer 2 system, and as usual, go to your developer 2 account, go to the personal Bitbucket settings, app passwords, create a app password, and this is for dev2 key. Give the access to the repository. This is the second developer account access key, right? So just add a key, copy this key. Let me add this as a password here. Now the clone is completed. When the clone is completed, the working copy will be get created automatically. The working copy name will same as your Bitbucket repository name. Go inside the working copy. It has automatically created a .git folder, which is the local repository, which has automatically created a pull so that the Bitbucket copy has actually pulled into the local. Now it's everything is there. It's just matter of you go and start modifying the code. Let's say I wanted to modify the code. Sorry, I'm just putting some line here. CIDR, let's say block. I'm just putting some dummy values. Okay. Now let me do git add. Let me do git commit. UVPC code is modified. Of course, it is looking for this git config, right? Git config user dot name. This is PR ready. Git config user dot email. Now let me do one more commit just to make sure that the things are good. Git add, git commit. Okay. So git push origin to the main. Asking for a password. Copy the password. Give it here. You see, this time it's very simple, right? Why? Since I'm doing the clone operation, right? The clone operation will take care of doing everything for you. That's the reason by default in your local also you are getting the main branch only. Why? When you are doing the clone, which branch that it is cloning from the remote, the same branch will be get created in your local as well, right? And hence I'm not making too confusing here. My local branch is name is main, my remote branch name is main, and I'm able to easily do the changes and put it back there. Now if you go to the developer one account, go to the repository. This is the developer one account. Go to the repository. You see that the vpc.tf file is modified 2 minutes ago. If you go inside the vpc.tf, you can see the line that was added by the developer 2. If you go to the commits tab, you see the commits here, right? And the multiple commits are showing here. So some commits are done by the developer 1, some commits are done by the developer 2. You are not getting the developer 2 name here because I actually done the commit before I add the git config command over there. That's the reason. That's okay. The same changes now can be seen in the developer 1 account also. If I go to the developer 1 account and do a refresh here, the developer 1 should be able to see the changes that are done by the developer 2 also. If I go to the vpc.tf file in the developer 1 account, I can see that the line that was added by the developer 2. If I go to the commits, I can see the same commits as well. So that's how, like, when the developer 1 is doing the changes, that can be seen by developer 2. When 2 is doing the changes, that can be seen by developer 1 as well. That's how the collaboration will happen here. So just to call out here, right, the git clone command is doing all these 5 steps automatically for you. So you just need to do the clone, add your files, and just put it back again. That's it. So I put some effort here just to show all these individual steps, guys. Right? How do you make all of this manually? But in general, right, we don't need to do all these 5 steps manually one by one. You can just directly do a git clone that takes care of doing these 5 steps automatically for you without much confusions. Obviously, right, doing the git clone is definitely recommended. We definitely use the same only in the real time, rather using the git remote add all this. But just to get the concept right, I thought of covering the git remote add all these commands and just to make it more detailed. But yeah, that caused some confusion because local, the branch name is master, remote, the branch name is main, it is not matching, and there is some confusion at the time of doing the push operation. But I'll call out that pull request concept, and I'll call out why the branching strategy, all these things tomorrow once again. Yeah, that's the story for today, guys. I think we'll talk tomorrow more on this. I think whatever the questions that we have, we can park it for tomorrow, because tomorrow we are trying to make it a little more uh, better by avoiding this master and main confusions. Okay, thank you.